What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to another episode where we're talking about some of the major headlines that have taken place in the news recently. Today's topic of discussion is ballot harvesting in tandem with the primary elections that have taken place in California. Now, to start off, what exactly is ballot harvesting? Because it is certainly one of those terms that gets thrown around and used all the time. However, there is a precise definition to what ballot harvesting really is, which is the systematic collection of absentee ballots and the subsequential submission of those ballots. Now, on this process in various states, there are different restrictions where there can be restrictions on who can collect and submit an absentee ballot, how many ballots can be collected and submitted on another person's behalf, as well as various reasons on why it is someone may be able to vote absentee. However, there are 13 states that have no restrictions on this ballot harvesting process. And of those 13 states, 11 of which happen to have a Democrat majority in their state legislature, with 2 out of 13 of those states having a GOP majority. Furthermore, there are 14 states that allow the counting of ballots after Election Day, which of course is what we're seeing now in California, is we're now a week after the election and they're still counting ballots. So that there are 14 states that allow that to happen where you can count ballots after the election. And 10 of those 14 states have a Democrat majority, whereas 4 of the 14 have a GOP majority. Now, furthermore, there are 8 states that both have no restrictions on ballot harvesting and allow for ballots to be counted after the election. And of those 8 states, all 8 of them have a Democrat majority in their state legislature. So clearly, we can see that there's a bit of a problem when it comes to Democrat run states and the issue of election integrity, where you're seeing, especially within California, you're seeing examples of people who may be homeless or drug addicted living on the street who happen to be voting in elections. Now, it would not be my judgment to assume that these are high propensity voters, that these are people who frequently vote in elections. And I would imagine that these are people who have been targeted by these, we'll call them ballot harvesters, by these people who go out and recruit people to vote for their candidate, hand them a ballot, and then submit it on their behalf. So you can definitely see that there is a bit of a problem in these Democrat-run states on the issue of ballot harvesting. However, this is certainly not a bug, but a feature of the election system in these states, because you're able to yield a certain outcome of which candidates you want to have advance through the primary and then win in the general elections. Because if you're able to go out and collect other people's ballots, if you're able to, working for a campaign, if you're paying people to go out and recruit voters, it's one thing to, get out the vote and encourage people to show up at the ballot box on election day, but it's another thing to collect a ballot on their behalf and then go and submit it. because, of course, this is completely prime for fraudulence and unethical behavior when those ballots are then submitted. Because if you go out and you give someone their ballot and you suggest who they should vote for, but if they vote for someone else, now you're also the person that then collects the ballot from them and claims to submit it. Well, what happens if those ballots then aren't submitted? Or if um, you have candidates who have these massive ballot dumps where, nearly all of the votes are going specifically to one candidate. And of course, this is exactly what you're seeing in California between both the gubernatorial election as well as the LA mayor election. Now, to focus in on some of these specific elections, you have three candidates that are running for, well, you have three front runners in the race for LA mayor. You have the incumbent Karen Bass, as well as a city council member, Nithya Raman, as well as the opposition candidate being represented by Spencer Pratt. Now, Spencer Pratt actually placed second on election day. And in the way that the jungle primary process works in California elections, all parties are running in the primary, and the top two vote getters then advance to the general election or the runoff election that takes place in November. So the opposition candidate, Spencer Pratt, he actually placed second on election day, which would suggest that he was geared up to advance to the general or the runoff again in November. However, in the days following the election, he's actually been overtaken and is now in third place. However, he had over a 3-point margin over the third place candidate, which now, of course, the results have flipped, where he is now in third place and Nithya Raman is in second. Well, why is it that that's happening? Well, Spencer Pratt has been very vocal in his campaign against the current policy outcomes that have taken place in Los Angeles, specifically regarding their addressing of wildfires and the way that they've addressed homelessness and drug addiction that has plagued the streets of LA now for years and only seems to be getting worse. So he's really called out the failed policy making of those currently in office. Well, Karen Bass, the front running candidate, is the incumbent mayor, and Nithya Raman is on the city council. So if Spencer Pratt were to advance to the general election, and God knows, possibly winning the LA mayoral election in November, well, that would point to a clear failure of Democrat rule in some of the most liberal areas of the country. And of course, this is not something that the Democrats can have happen, is the rejection of their candidates in a dark blue area. So what is it that they do is they have to do everything possible to ensure that Spencer Pratt does not advance in this election. So they go out and they find people oftentimes from off the street to fill in ballots and then submit those ballots in mass to be counted days and weeks after the election. And so again, you've seen this flip where the candidate that placed second and was projected to advance is now no longer being projected to advance and it has now been cut out of the election. Again, this is not a bug, but it's a feature of the election process in California, is to have opposition candidates left on the sidelines while the status quo being in California, the status quo being far left policy agendas being the candidates who advance. Furthermore, in the gubernatorial election, you're seeing something very similar happen, where the leading candidate on election day was Steve Hilton, a Republican, and the second and third place candidates were two Democrats, Xavier Becerra as well as Tom Steyer. However, again, in the days and weeks following the election, Steve Hilton is now no longer in first place. He's fallen to second place. Xavier Becerra has taken over in first place, and Tom Steyer is slowly but surely catching up to Steve Hilton. Now, again, this is about a week after the primary election, and there's still roughly 25% of ballots to be counted, which is obviously ridiculous that you can't have an election happen on election day. It's something that isn't true in countries all over the world. I mean, look at India, the most populated country on earth, and they run their elections in one day. So why is it that California, that has 30 to 35 million people, takes a whole month to run an election when a country with over 1 billion people can run an election in one day? So it's very much a third world system of elections that's happening in California, that's completely built fraud into their system. Well, I guess you can't necessarily call it fraud if it's done legally. However, it's something that would be seen as very fraudulent, just in terms of the ethics behind it. But again, this is something that has been built into the system in California, not as a bug, but a feature, again, to ensure that it is the Democrat candidates promoting a far left agenda are the ones that advance in the elections. And any sort of rejection of that agenda by the voters is very quickly squelched, and done so through the process of ballot harvesting. Now, and you can even see the I guess transparency of Democrats in California and this process, where the currently seated governor, Gavin Newsom, just weeks before the election said that there is a, quote, break the glass scenario if the Republicans begin doing too well in these elections. Now, he wasn't exactly clear on what that break the glass scenario was and what it would entail. However, I think it would be fair to conclude that it had something to do with ballot harvesting. Now, with all that being said, we find ourselves at the end of another great episode. I certainly hope you were able to take something away from what it is I was able to talk about. I certainly hope to see you here again soon. My name is Brett Cody Fornatoro. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I will see you in the next episode.